Welcome back to our Medicine Walk Read Aloud. Today we are going to be reading Chapter 4. Yesterday we read Chapter 3 of Medicine Walk by Ardith Mayer. And in Chapter 3, Burr came across a rattlesnake as he's trying to make his way across the Arizona desert, trying to find civilization. At the end of Chapter 3, after a long day of walking and trying to go up and down the mountains to try to find civilization, he's very thirsty, trying to conserve water. And at the end of Chapter 3, it ended by saying, "I smelled water." We are going to be reading Chapter 4 today, which is called Night by the Water. So here we go, his first night. Between the ridge I'd just come down and the toes of the neighboring mesa ran a narrow valley. At its bottom there was a wide stream bed with a trickle of water snaking down its middle. Cottonwoods were growing along the banks, and scrub and few pinyons lined its course. I badly wanted to run the rest of the way, but I'd been walking over this kind of terrain for a while now. I knew the sort of trap it could set for a foot that wasn't very careful. I held myself back by main force, but I did fumble for the water bottle and drain it into my mouth. Something inside me perked up to attention. That was a foolish thing, it said to me, almost in a real voice. What if the water down there is alkali water? What if it's polluted so you can't drink it? What'll you do then? And now you've spoiled your control. Gonna have to start all over again. It wasn't exactly me talking way down there inside myself. It was partly Ch4's teachings, partly my listening to the tales of the Apache hands told to Charlie's family stories. This wasn't my own country. My kind never had to face it, raw, the way the Apache had. But the Apache were human beings, no more, no less. What they could learn to do, surely I could, if I had the time left before a rattler or the sun or thirst got to me. But I knew how lucky I was to have shared even a little of Charlie's trainings. It gave me a handle on things that I'd never have been able to work out for myself. Now I was almost on a level with the cottonwoods. A track led across the stream bed to the water. I chanced running until I was on that path, and then I looked down. Prints, not of cattle. Dainty. Mule deer, I thought. Even with the shadows of late evening blurring them, I could trace the narrow outlines. But there was another, too. I stared down with my spine curling back on itself. A cat track, bigger than my spread hand, fingers and all. A shiver went up me and then back down. I paused right there, thinking hard. It seemed there was plenty of game. That fellow shouldn't be hungry. I had no reason to think it might develop a taste for me. But I was alone, and I was relatively small. Maybe just about the right size for a midnight snack. Who knew what wild animal might be who knew what the wild animal might be thinking? Ch4 had taught me caution, along with so much else. I went down to the water a lot more carefully than I might have. At the brushy border of the vegetation, I stopped dead still and looked hard up and down the stream. There were a lot of tracks out on the flat, outlined in shadow on the dun-colored sand and pebbles. I listened then. Something went crashing through the brush across and upstream from me, but I didn't see anything. There came a splash from upstream, where a bend in the watercourse had formed an eddy. I could see a large hole of water. It looked pretty deep. Maybe a fish? That would come in handy in the morning, if I could get him. I looked about one more time and stepped into the open, then moved up along the shallow stream toward that deep place. A bird called shrilly, somewhere out of sight. A sad, keening cry echoed down the valley. A shiver went back over the course, leaving goose pimples in its wake. I thought of that cat track. Something rustled in one of the cottonwoods, making a whir sound. Eerie. This was different country from my own, down in the southwest corner of the state. I didn't know what kind of creatures I might find here. I was almost to the pool. Just as the light died away, I got there. The water shone silvery under the starlight. I ached to feel it lapping against my skin, and I sat on a rock and pulled off my sneakers, if you could call them that anymore. Tatters would probably be a better word for them, but I wanted to soak my bruised, cut, scraped, sore feet. Not to mention the rest of me, which I felt as if I'd been living on a griddle. Still, I had to think and drink and fill my water before I fouled the water. I made it take a while. Didn't want to lose control again. My mouth was aching for a scoop of that chilly water, but I made it while I filled the bottle and I capped it, bent again very slowly, and made a cup of my hands. Then I drank. There's nothing, just absolutely nothing, as good as plain cold water. If you don't believe me, just try staggering up and down mountains for a while without enough of it. When I was through, I skinned out of my t-shirt and jeans and underwear and slid into the pool. The air was chilly now, but my sunburn didn't really know that. I sat on the bottom of the pool with my head sticking out. It eased the burn a lot. And I sat there for long after I was cold. Something about the water made me feel better, inside and outside. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was Dad's face, as it had been when I saw it last. It seemed to be engraved on the insides of my eyelids. I opened my eyes again quickly. Something inside me was holding away the fact that Dad was dead. I couldn't afford that kind of grief, the full realization of what I had lost. Not now. I didn't have the strength and the energy to spare. I had to turn my feelings all the way off, the way the Apache had done. Cold and tough and unfeeling, that was the only way I could come out of this alive. I shook myself, standing in the water, then waded ashore. It was cold now, and my teeth chattered as I stripped the water off my skin with my hands. I pulled on my gritty clothes with shaking hands, welcoming the faint warmth of the sand around my feet. The rocks were even warmer, and the big boulder on which I'd sat glowed with heat. I thought for a minute of digging myself into the sand around the base of the rock. But then I remembered the cat track. The moon wasn't up yet, but it wasn't too dark. The sky was full of stars, the Milky Way shining. My eyes had adjusted as the light left, so I could see fairly well. I could find some place safer to sleep, I thought. A gruff cough from upstream made me hurry into the line of cottonwoods. Looking up, I could see them outlined against the sky. I needed one with branches big enough for me to feel secure. Sleeping in a tree was never one of my ambitions, but it was a darn sight better than waking up in the jaws of a cougar. Long ago, Dad and I had made a trip to the Rockies. Our guide had told us hair curlers about campers being torn out of their sleeping bags by bears. I felt sure that's what if a bear could do that, a cougar could do it, and better. A tree up ahead leaned against the one next to it, making a kind of stair. I moved to it, felt it. The roots were out of the ground, but the wood was alive, and the tree it leaned against had good-sized branches. I went up like a monkey and pulled myself onto a solid limb. I wouldn't call it a comfortable place to sleep. Still, there was one limb I could wrap my arms around and lean my head on while I sat on the one below. I wouldn't fall out. It would do. As I settled onto my perch, something moved on the path below. Quiet sounds moving toward the water. Deer, maybe, or elk, going to drink. Something squalled in the distance, and the hooves stilled. Echoes bounced crazily around the canyon. When they died, the steps below went on, and I settled my head onto my arm and tried my best to relax. My stomach growled painfully, and I sat up, surprised myself. I'd forgotten about eating. I must be getting used to being hungry, or else I was so worried about the cougar off in the brush that I just didn't think. I maneuvered my pack around in front of me and dug out a handful of raisins. When they were gone, I got out half an apricot and ate that too. They went down into a huge pit of emptiness and got lost there. When my meal was over, I got into position again, but sleep wouldn't come. I was thinking for the first time about how different I was from the person I'd been a day and a half ago. Last night, I'd been too tired, too shocked and exhausted to do anything but curl up in a rock cranny and sleep. Now I felt odd, lightheaded, almost above myself, looking down with surprise at the Burr Henderson in the cottonwood. I'd never in my life gone without eating all I wanted, drinking all I needed, sleeping in a comfortable bed after a refreshing shower. I'd never really believed that you could do without such things. Books told people about who didn't have what I had, but books were removed from the person that I really was. I knew they were true. I knew that you could live without practically nothing and keep going. I'd found a space inside myself that I'd never suspected was there. I was finding that I knew things that I hadn't realized that I knew. Part of it came from Nachito and the Apache Hands. Part came from watching Dad on camping and hunting canoeing trips before he got so busy and listening to his tales and explanations. But a big lot of it was just there. Things I never remembered knowing or even being told. I stared into the night. Maybe inside every one of us is a Stone Age man, just waiting to be needed. I said aloud, and then I grinned. Who'd believe I was sitting in a tree talking to myself out in the middle of nowhere? I was only half asleep when the cougar padded to the foot of my tree, sniffed around it for a terribly long time, then finally turned away and left. Only then did I relax totally and drop into a sleep so deep that the tree might have been my bed at home. The end of chapter 4. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you for chapter 5.